Welcome back to another episode of the Crime Scene Insiders. I'm one of your hosts, Angela Davies, and I'm here with my co-host, Dion Watson, and we're going to take you back under the barrier tape. So before we get into today's episode, we've got some really big news for you. Dee and I are going to be joining the lineup at CrimeCon Birmingham on the 25th of April 2026. And then we'll be back again for CrimeCon London on the 3rd and 4th of October 2026. Birmingham is a brand new stop for CrimeCon UK, and it's already shaping up to be something special. We're going to be there alongside some of the most recognisable voices and experts in true crime for a full immersive day of stories, insight and conversations. Tickets are limited for Birmingham, so make sure you get yours as soon as possible to avoid disappointment.
And then we're going to be taking everything to the next level in London, which is another chance to meet, chat theories and dig deeper into the cases that we cover. Whether you've been listening to us since the beginning or you've only just discovered us, we'd love for you to say hello at either event. Or, better yet, come and say hi at both. Hang out with us and the rest of the true crime community at CrimeCon Birmingham and CrimeCon London. Partnered by the True Crime Channel, the expert-led true crime channel available wherever you listen. Just head over to crimecon.co.uk and use our promo code INSIDERS for 10% off your ticket.
Announcements about guest speakers and content creators are being released on the CrimeCon UK social channels, so keep your eyes peeled. 2 cities, 2 incredible events. We can't wait to see you there. And now for this week's episode.
For today's episode, we are joined by Justine Shanahan, who has been CSI since the year 2000 and has spent 25 years working on crime scenes. Alongside Justine's operational career, she's also a lecturer at the University of Lincoln, so she's bringing her real-world CSI experience to our new generation of CSIs. And her career, strangely, parallels with Angie's in a lot of ways. So as we've been having conversations before coming on here, there's so many similarities in how you two came to be in this field, isn't there? So thank you so much, Justine, for coming on and joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we're really excited to hear your stories.
Oh, thank you for having me.
To get us started, would you mind telling us a little bit about the beginning of your career? So how you came to be in CSI? Is it something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, so we've got to go back into the dark ages in before CSI was popular. This is what I think people don't understand these days, because it's so popular, that back then it just wasn't. So I was school age. It was probably early 90s. Friends would spend their pocket money on sticker packs or sweets, and I would go to the bargain bin in a bookshop in Whitby that sold crime books, and I'd spend my 99 pence on a murder book. And my poor mum and dad must have wondered what the heck was going on, because it wasn't a popular career choice like it is now. So I don't know whether
they're a psychopath.
Perhaps they're just pleased I'm a CSI and not a murderer. I don't know.
All worked out well in the end.
Yeah, so really early on, I was quite passionate about forensics, but it was more difficult to get into than it is now, which was a real double-edged sword, because it wasn't as popular, so it was more difficult to find out about the world of CSI. But also, when I was 17, I contacted Cleveland Police, which are my local police force, and said, "Oh, I'm interested in becoming a SOCO, as it was then. Would I be able to go out on attachment with one of your SOCOs?" And they said, "Oh, well, we've never been asked before, but if you like." And went out with a lovely lady I know, Ange knows, Mandy Johns. She took me under her wing and took me out on some attachment days, and absolutely loved it. Asked if I could go and see a post-mortem, just to see if I could cope with seeing a body. And they spoke to the coroner, and the coroner said, "Yeah, tell her to be at this place at this time." And I went along to James Cook in Middlesbrough and went and saw some hospital post-mortems.
That's amazing at 17.
It's quite shocking, isn't it? But
yeah,
at the time, I just was pleased that I'd had the chance to do that before I went down the route of CSI, because I thought, what's the point in going down this career path if I get to my first body and I can't cope with it?
Yeah.
So yeah, settled on that's what I wanted to do. At the time, the only place that did any sort of forensics undergraduate degree was Teesside, which was just down the road from where I lived, and the last place I wanted to go to university because I wanted to experience what my friends were experiencing, which was being away from home
away
for the
from
first
home.
time. And
Yeah.
I did move out and went into student accommodation, but I was literally 20 minutes down the road from my mum and dad, and it was brilliant. I can't complain. So I did an applied science and forensic measurement degree at Teesside University.
Because there was no actual crime scene degrees around then at all, was there?
Nothing. No, there was only forensics. That was the only forensics undergrad, and then there was a forensic masters that you could do, but nothing CSI based at all. And I finished my degree and I went traveling for a year, and I planned to come back, get a part-time job and go traveling again. But in the meantime, CSI had come on the TV, and all of a sudden forensics was everywhere and everyone wanted to be a crime scene investigator. And a girl I'd met on my course said, look, my younger sister's doing a forensics degree now. It's very much CSI based, and once they start graduating, you're not going to stand up against them in an interview. So if you want a job, you need to think about getting it now before they graduate. So
Interesting. That was good advice from...
yeah, it really was, because when I started ringing round all the different forces, there was only 60 of us in the country that had a forensics degree. So it sort of put me ahead of the game in a lot of respects. That and the fact that I'd organised my own attachments and I'd been to see a post-mortem and I could reference that in an interview. So
it's all those little things, isn't it, to get you ahead? It's what we try and drum to students now. Anything that can make you stand out just a little bit against somebody else is going to give you the edge, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, especially now with it being so popular. But yes, spoke to the scientific support manager for Northamptonshire Police. They were recruiting, so I literally did a 24-hour turnaround on an application form. Managed to get that job as a... I know. I was keen.
You were.
I started Pro Plus from my university days.
Yeah. Oh, the good old Pro Plus. Forgot about them.
Yeah. They got through a lot, didn't they?
Yeah. So got a volume crime scene examiner job with them, which is a tier 1 now. I think most forces refer to them as tier 1s. And then less than a year later, got an application form through the post, didn't request it. They'd kept my name on file from all the phone calls I've made, and got an application form for a tier 2 like a full CSI job or full SOCO job with Lincolnshire Police. So I applied for that and got it in 2001, and I've never left.
Brilliant. So they actually kept your name from your ringing around and sent you the application.
Yeah, the only
That's
place
fantastic.
it was advertised was the local paper in Lincoln, so I would never have seen the advert had they not kept my name on file. So all that effort that I went to ring all of these scientific support managers and introduce myself paid off. But I didn't know where Lincoln was, never heard of it, didn't know where in the country it was, never been there. So the first time I went to Lincoln was for my interview, and the second time was to move into a new house and start my job.
Wow.
That's fast moving.
Yeah, 2 feet straight in there.
But I think if you want to do a job like CSI, you've got to be prepared to go where the jobs are, even more so these days.
Yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it?
Yeah.
People who want to stay in the local area. I mean, we were both fortunate. We got one in the northeast, but it's not guaranteed. And we know quite a few people that have had to move and have moved all over the country, actually.
Yeah. I think it's a double-edged sword, though, because I don't know whether you ever encountered it. How was it working in an area that you were either grown up in or grown up close to? Because were you not encountering people through work that you knew in your personal life? And was that not difficult?
I was far enough away because it was Northumbria and we're in Teesside, so we still had another force in between us, so it wasn't too bad for me. But you were right in the thick of it too, weren't you?
Yeah, so I'm from South Tyneside area and I covered mostly Sunderland, so it wasn't the area I lived in. I didn't actually ever encounter anybody that I knew outside of work whilst I was there, so I was quite lucky in that respect, though.
Yeah.
I think it would be very different for police officers. I think police officers will probably engage more with people that they see out and about a lot more than we do, but no, I didn't. find that, thankfully. It would be strange, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I always felt quite fortunate, I suppose, that it was a new area to me, so that I literally didn't know anybody. It was quite a rural force, and it still is, but Lincolnshire was a much more rural county back then, and I hadn't heard anything about Lincolnshire. That never seemed to feature on any news programs. So I kind of thought, well, might be quite a nice place to start my career. It's not going to be too busy. They don't seem to have a lot of major crime. It'll be a good place to cut my teeth. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. It just turns out that they just didn't put anything on national news. So there was lots going on that nobody knew about.
Come to Lincoln, they said. There'll be a little crime, they said.
Yeah. Turned out it was a bit of a baptism of fire.
Was it? How did you find that leap from tier 1 to tier 2 then?
I always wanted, like I said, I always wanted to be a CSI, so I was just desperate. I grabbed it with both hands, but I wasn't even an experienced tier 1. I'd only been in that job 9 months. So I had been to some major crime alongside tier 2s, but I had done in-house training. So I didn't have any qualifications in CSI when I joined Lincolnshire Police. So I joined in the good old days where you went up to Durham for the 9-week CSI course.
Brilliant. Did you enjoy that?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. Yeah, I mean, the accommodation was horrific. It was like being a student again. But I had no reason not to want to be there. I didn't know anyone in Lincolnshire, so I didn't really have a reason to want to be anywhere else. I was young and I was single, so for me it was just perfect. It was just like extending that student time for another 9 weeks, but studying something that I was really interested in.
Yeah.
I came back off my course and I was put straight on call. I don't think they do it quite this way now, but it was straight in at the deep end.
Wow.
And my first night on call, I got called out.
Oh no, do you remember what too?
Oh yeah. My phone rang and it was my manager. And I remember saying, "Oh, we haven't got a body, have we?" And he said, No, we've got 2.
Oh,
And it was
your first night on call.
Double murder on my first night on call. It was an interesting one, really. It was some half brothers. A young man called Andrew Walker. He was in his 20s. He was in council accommodation, and his younger half brother had come to visit him for the first time. He was only 17 and he was an A-level student. There was a concern for welfare, and the elder brother, Andrew, was found shot in the head in the bath, and the younger brother was found shot in the head on a put-me-up bed in the living room. And we didn't know why. Neither of them had been in trouble with the police, and there was no history there. And it turned out that the person who rented the flat had done a flat share with someone called Jeremy Earls. And Jeremy had moved from Lincoln to Cambridgeshire, and Andrew had moved from Cambridgeshire to the flat in Lincoln. And Jeremy was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he became convinced that there was something nefarious with the flat swap and that he'd got the raw end of the deal, even though it was something that he'd agreed to. And he had a reactivated Uzi submachine gun, and he went and shot the brothers. Alex, the younger one, he'd never even met. He just happened to be there in the flat visiting on the night of the murder. Then Jeremy went to a remote location, another location in Lincolnshire, and took a large amount of tranquilizers, and then shot himself in the head in his car, but tried to make it look like a murder, and had sent a tape to his solicitor saying only to be played in the event of my violent death. And yeah, he'd staged his suicide look like a murder, but he was linked to the murders with the weapon that he'd used. And we did investigate whether or not someone had murdered all 3 of them, but it turned out that he'd murdered the 2 brothers and then taken his own life.
It's horrendous.
So that was day 1.
Yeah,
Day
wow.
1 done.
You weren't kidding when you said a baptism of fire, were you?
Well, and it just continued. I think I thought, well, that's got to be a one-off in this lovely, quiet, rural county.
I
But
mean, but how often do you get double murder suicide?
yeah, not very, as it transpired. But I
No.
didn't know that. You see, I thought, is this the way it's going to be? Because in quick succession to that, we had a 17-year-old go missing. She was 5 months pregnant and was reported missing once she started missing antenatal classes. Coincidentally, I'd been to a commercial burglary where someone had broken in and bled at the commercial burglary, and a hammer had been used just to inflict damage to a wall. And because I was really young in service and keen, I photographed all these hammer marks in the wall with a scale and swabbed the blood, and that was sent off. And it was ultimately identified to someone that lived in a flat either above or below our 17-year-old missing person. As a result of that DNA hit, his flat was searched, and in his pocket, her birth certificate was found with his plantar print in it, in her blood. And at that point, we realised that perhaps something nefarious had happened to this young lady. And it turned out that he had murdered her in his flat and cut her up and put her into the River Witham in pieces, and then spent a large amount of time tied in his flat because we hadn't realised that that she was missing, and we certainly hadn't realised there was a connection between the two of them. And so that was one of the first times luminol was used. We used luminol in the scene to try and find the blood staining that he'd tried to clean up and paint over. So then I started to think perhaps Lincolnshire had a bit of an underbelly that I wasn't aware of.
No, yeah.
Lincolnshire, this lovely rural county is a bit dark after all. Bloody hell. They're actually both really brutal and really sad, and also involving youngsters. That must have been really difficult because you're only still young yourself as well.
Yeah, I was early 20s. And I think that probably helped that I didn't have children and that I was still quite keen and robust, because the next murder we had was another 13-year-old that was murdered by a friend's father who'd slit her throat and then left the body and then pretended that he had just come across her and she'd been murdered. And it turned out that he'd actually lured her to the woodland, plied her with alcohol and murdered her. So
My God. And he was a father to a friend.
Yeah. It was only, I think we found his coat back in his home address with her blood spatter on the inside of a cuff. And in his story, he had gone on his bike, found her body, rang the police, and never returned home between her between the murder and finding her. He just said, "Oh, I just came across her." But then he had to explain how a jacket of his had got back inside his home address with her spatter inside his cuff. And obviously that's where he'd slit her throat and then gone back to his home address, taken the coat off, grabbed his bike and returned to the scene, and then rang police saying he'd come across her body. So
I've got something strange going on inside of me. There's part of me like, I never want to move to Lincoln. And then there's another part of me that goes, I want to be a CSI in Lincoln. Even after all these years, I'm still like, oh my God, I want to do it.
It was crazy because this was all within the first year of me being there. These are just the ones that I can think of. I don't know whether there were any in between, but within the first year, there was another one where a student I think she was 18, had been lured by a friend of hers to a remote location, and the friend decided that she wanted to commit a murder. And this Michelle Stokes, this young girl, had become the sort of target of that desire to murder somebody for no real reason. The murderer lured her to a remote location and tried to strangle her in the car and didn't succeed, so beat her to death with a crowbar. And you think, what, like you said, it wasn't just murders, it was horrific murders, and a lot of them involving young people, and then a young offender as well, a young female offender murdering another young woman.
Which again is unusual, isn't it? It's not
really,
something you get every day.
Yeah, really unique. But I feel terrible saying it really, because these are people's lives. And it was a horrific thing that happened to all of these people. But as a CSI, it was quite exhilarating and interesting, and it was what I'd signed up to the job to do. I didn't want to go to burglaries and cars. That was fine, and I was happy to do it, but I wanted to be involved in major crime until I didn't. And I thought, I need a break. And I distinctly remember finishing late because these had all been very much back to back, and saying, I'm going home on time, I'm on call tonight, I absolutely cannot stay late, I need to get an early night. And my phone rang about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was the control room, and just saying, we cannot have another murder, we just can't. And they said, no, we've got a riot at Lincoln Prison, and the prison's in lockdown.
Oh no!
All the prisoners had managed to overpower the guards and got into the medical wing, and I got called out as the first CSI to a prison riot.
Oh.
Wow.
And at that point, I thought, I can't do this anymore. So that was October 2002. So all of that was between April 2001 and October 2002. And then it seemed to die down. That's a terrible phrase to use, but it did seem to settle down a bit after that. And I thought, maybe Lincolnshire isn't this crime haven that I've come to believe it might be. But yeah, it was an unusual time, I think, in Lincolnshire's history, and I happened to just be there at the wrong time or the right time, depending on
you want to look at it.
how you looked at it. There's never been another period quite like that where we had back-to-back jobs in such quick succession that was so horrific. And a lot of them were Cat A murders. We didn't know who'd done it, which again is unusual. You tend to find that there's a connection between the victim and the suspect, but in some of these there wasn't really.
Stranger murders involving youngsters, absolute brutality.
Yeah,
it is also unusual. Like we say, it's the thing that we're passionate about and we want to do, but actually not all the time, because it is overwhelming, isn't it? But it happens maybe a couple of times throughout a year, not in quick succession like that. It is generally unusual. For anyone listening, it's generally unusual.
Yeah,
people.
It was, even for Lincolnshire, like I said, it calmed down after that, as I remember it, because I have looked back and thought, has this all become compressed in my mind? And actually, it wasn't in that quick succession. But it was only when I've sort of had a quick look at some dates, because I knew I was talking to you, and I was interested to find out whether it was just in hindsight. And then I looked at the dates, and it was, August 21, March 22, July 2002, October 2002, October 2002. You think, oh no, it really was one on top of another, and then much more normal crime after that.
Normal crime.
Normal crime for a rural county.
So at least you knew quite quick in that you were okay coping with that sort of thing, having that much together.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was my age. You do feel quite unstoppable at that age, I think. I didn't have a family of my own. I think having a child changed my perspective on things massively. But yeah, I think you're untouchable. I think you think you're untouchable when you're young, and you do just bounce from one thing to another, and you just get a call out, and then you'd have your 4 hours sleep, and you'd be back at work the next day, and you'd be absolutely fine. Whereas now, many, many years on, you get called out, and it takes you 3 or 4 days to recover from it.
Very different working shifts and being called out and working long hours, isn't it? As you get older, it definitely is. Can I take you back to the murder of the young woman in the flat? Because the one of the two young men, the half brothers, that was obviously related to mental health issues. The young woman that was murdered, did you ever find out the motive for that?
She was a vulnerable young woman. Like I said, she was 17 and 5 months pregnant. Her neighbour was considerably older than her, and I think he quite liked her. And I think the suggestion was that he'd wanted more than a friendship with her, and she'd rebuffed him. And that was it. So he murdered her, and the only way he could foresee being able to remove her from the flat was in smaller pieces. So he dismembered her in the bathroom and took her out in bags and threw her into the with him. And we never have recovered all of her, unfortunately.
That's really sad. Did he have mental health issues or previous that you can remember?
I can't remember, to be
No.
honest. It was a guy named Stephen Hughes, but I try not to dwell too much on the suspects. I
Yeah,
prefer to try and think about the victims, because I don't think suspects really deserve you the time of day. So I
yeah,
know he was a
Yeah.
prolific offender in that I'd got a DNA hit on him at a commercial burglary, and another colleague had got a
yeah.
DNA hit on a glove from a commercial burglary. So he was certainly a prolific burglar. I don't know about whether he had a violent offender history, but
Yeah,
um,
because it's a hell of a step, isn't it, from burglary to murder?
yeah,
I was just going to say with that one as well, that's really interesting how he came about into that investigation as well, though, just from he was getting searched to do with the burglary, so nothing to do with the murder.
yeah.
So it's just interesting how that set off that chain of events as well.
I knew there was a reason why I'd mentioned the hammers. So I went to a commercial burglary and I'd said about photographing the hammer marks.
Mm.
And like I said, it was because I was young and keen, and I just thought that's interesting. And they were very pronounced marks from the head of a hammer in plasterboard. When we found her skull, there was a hammer impression in the skull, and they couldn't find the hammer in his address, but they did try to see if they could link that impression with the impressions from the burglary where I'd got his blood. I don't
Ah,
remember whether or not they ever did make or how strong a connection they made. But it just goes to show as a CSI that you recover or photograph quite a remote piece of evidence or something that you think, oh, I'll just do it because I don't know really why, but because. And then it ends up being involved in a murder investigation. You could never foresee that happening. So
no.
it does just go to show you need to remember to think outside the box. And again, I
Yeah.
think because I was so young and keen, perhaps I was willing to take a little bit more time at a commercial burglary rather than just swabbing the blood that was obviously the offenders and leaving, which
A
probably
lot of people
could
probably
be
would. Yeah,
guilty of
Mm.
yeah.
at other jobs.
I think when you're young and new in as well, though, you do everything like to the letter, don't you? Because
Yeah,
you want to get the evidence, you want to do the best you can.
yeah,
You don't know what's going to end up being important or not. So I do think that, in the beginning you're much more thorough.
yeah. I would agree. And I think you haven't got the confidence. And it would have
Yeah,
been wrong to have ignored that evidence, but maybe if I'd been more confident in my decision making, I wouldn't have prioritized it.
yeah,
Because
Mm.
again, at the end of the day, it was hammer marks in plasterboard. It wasn't on metal, so you're not going to get striation marks. You didn't have
yeah.
a clean impression. So maybe if I'd been more confident, I'd have thought, yeah, that's probably not going to be evidentially useful. But because I didn't have that confidence, I just thought, oh, I'll just take some pictures. Be nice to
And
find out if they actually ever did provide a link. It's so long ago that I
Mm.
can't remember. But
going back as well to the father who murdered the young girl, what was the
mm,
motive behind that?
I think there was a sexual element to it. So I don't know why she was at his address, whether she turned up to see her friend, but somehow she ended up at her friend's dad's address and he'd given her alcohol and then lured her into a nearby woodland and slit her throat with a Gurkha knife. But if I remember rightly, there was a sexual element to it.
I
But
did
like I said,
wonder.
Mm.
he tried to play it off that he'd innocently happened across this body of his daughter's friend, and very much played the victim to start with, until obviously the story started to unravel a little bit.
Such an awful one, that, isn't it? And then for it to be a father and it's a friend who's kind of around the same age as his daughter and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So strange one, isn't it?
Awful for the daughter as well, having to come to
Yeah,
terms with the fact that your dad's done that to a
Dear
friend of
a
friend.
yours.
friend. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's horrendous.
Yeah, it's often the ripple effect of crime, isn't it? People don't seem to realize the impact that it has, but not just necessarily on the direct victim sometimes, but on families as well.
Yeah,
It does
that's
ripple
right.
through, doesn't it? Did you find that any of those cases impacted your mental health, or because you were so young and feeling so keen and robust, were you still all right at that point?
I think I was okay at that point. And again, it makes you sound like a monster because there's been very few jobs that have stuck with me. And there was only ever one job that I actually cried at the scene, and that was where some dogs had died.
Oh,
It's
I'm sorry
awful.
for
I
that.
know. I know.
Do you know,
The worst of it was they died in a fire at a breeding kennels, and there's myself and the loss adjuster at this scene, both in absolute bits, like genuinely crying at the scene. But the week before, I'd been to a chip pan fire where a lady had very, very sadly lost her life, and I didn't stand and cry at that scene, and I thought this is it was something I really had to get my head around why am I so upset about this job involving these animals, where I seem to be able to compartmentalize jobs involving humans.
humans?
And I can't really explain it, but that's the only scene that I've ever gone to and cried at the scene while I was working. There's been things that I've come away and either had a think about and it's been upsetting. So I would say that was probably, yeah, the worst job in terms of impact on my mental health at the time. If you'd asked me up until about 5 years ago whether any of the jobs had affected my mental health, I would have said no. I genuinely thought that the impact on your mental health would have been flashbacks to a specific job or a face or a specific scene or set of circumstances, and I'd never have that. So people would say, oh, does it not affect you? And I'd say, no. What I failed to recognize was that I was living in a world of perpetual fear, and I was mitigating risk continuously that didn't exist.
Oh, really?
And
That's
I think
interesting.
it was because of everything that I'd seen. It wasn't one specific job, but it was the culmination of everything I'd seen and then having a child. And everywhere I looked, I saw danger, and I was trying to
Danger.
mitigate this danger. And actually, it was all in my head, it didn't exist. And it took for my husband and my colleague, very good colleague, and obviously my husband knows me very well, to say, you're not well, you need to go and speak to someone about this, and had some CBT, and that was fabulous. I don't know how it worked. I genuinely don't know how it worked, but it just helped me to put the lid back on the box. But that caught me by surprise because that's not what I was expecting when I thought about how this job might affect your mental health.
Yeah, I guess
yeah.
that's not what you expect, is it? Like you say, I think we expect flashbacks or specific sets of circumstances, but the brain's a
Yeah.
really powerful thing, actually, isn't it? And
Mm.
when you're exposed to repeated trauma, you never know quite how it's going to catch you, do you?
Yeah. Well, the counsellor said something really interesting at the beginning of the first session when I told him what I did for a living. He said, you're going to think the world smells of shit when you live in a sewer. And I
Yeah.
thought, that's
It's an
really,
interesting way of putting it.
really interesting. That really resonated with me. And he said, give yourself a break. It's no wonder your brain's working in this way because it's all you see day in, day out. And not necessarily even all you see, but even the jobs that you're not involved in, you're in the office, you're involved in
Yeah.
the conversations. So it's wider than just the scenes that you attend yourself. You're sort of in it with your colleagues as well. But yeah, CBT worked wonders, and I think would definitely recommend anyone that is struggling not to shy away from that, because I found it really useful, really helpful.
That's fantastic.
You mentioned there that one of your colleagues actually pointed it out to you,
Yeah,
and to your husband. So they noticed a change.
yeah.
Was it a change or?
Yeah, I was constantly anxious and distracted, and I almost disconnected from the real world, I
Mm,
think, because I was so preoccupied with trying to avert and mitigate all this risk that I could see. And it was exhausting because I'd live out whole scenarios that hadn't happened. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until I was part way through the scenario or at the end of the scenario that I'd click back to reality and think, what are you doing? This hasn't happened. But I'd already lived that emotion and lived that scenario as if it was happening. It took them to say, you can't live like this, it's not normal. And then it kind of became apparent. I thought, oh, you're right. But at the time I couldn't see it, I think because I was in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they often say that, don't you? Until you step off the merry-go-round, you don't see
Yeah.
it, like what's going on it. And how did you find that while you were working? Obviously, you were in the police and you were saying you had this issue.
Yeah.
Was it something that was openly talked about in the office, or was everyone supportive?
I think I was very lucky in two respects. One was that it was later on in my career. I think had it been earlier on in my career when the office was a very different environment, there were a lot older CSIs, long-standing CSIs, very stiff upper lip, very
Yeah.
don't show your emotions, and I think it would have been frowned upon to have admitted that you were affected by the job. By the time I started to struggle, the office was a very different place. I was one of the longer standing members of staff. Everyone that had come after me was a lot more accepting, I think, of the impact of the job on your mental
Yeah.
health. So I was really fortunate that when it happened, I was in a very supportive office, in a very supportive home. So I was never made to feel ashamed of the fact that it had had some sort of impact on me. It was more the opposite, that my colleagues were saying, of course it's had an impact on you. So I'm pleased to say that certainly in Lincolnshire, we've caught up a little bit in relation to protecting people's mental health, and those services are available now. People can access them without anybody else being aware of it if they want to, and for some people that's very important. But I am glad that we realise how detrimental a job like this can be on people's mental health, and that the support is now there. Would I have accessed it sooner had it been there? Probably not. Did I need it sooner? Probably not. I think it was probably having my daughter that sparked the spiral. I think up until that point, I was quite robust, but having her, I think, changed my view of the world anyway.
Yeah. After the CBT, did you go back into work?
Yeah, I wasn't off work at that time. I did it alongside my work. And strangely, it wasn't really the work that was affected, it was my home life. So although I think work was causing it, I was still quite able to go and do the jobs. The problem was living out these scenarios of things like car accidents. I would become paranoid that my parents were going to be involved in a car accident, or I'd be driving my daughter to school and I'd think, what would happen if a wheel came off that lorry right now and hit the car? Or would I swerve into that field? Or what if I hit that tree when I swerved? And it didn't make any sense because none of it was happening.
Yeah.
But it was bizarre because I was still functioning at work. My inability to function was far more in my personal life.
Do you think that we all do that to some extent anyway? You know, some of that morbid fascination. I know that I've been driving behind like lorries and things before, you know, where they've had stuff strapped on the back, and I've thought if that were to come loose, that'd come straight through the windscreen, or
Well, we've
you know,
all
if
seen
any.
Final Destination.
Yeah.
You're not driving behind
With
a
the
log
logs.
lorry anytime soon. And
Yeah.
that was something that was explained to me in the CBT, that that's entirely normal. To have intrusive thoughts is entirely normal, and it's a hangover from how we've developed. It
Yeah.
keeps us safe in a lot of respects. So that was really important to me to hear, that intrusive thoughts in itself isn't a bad thing and can actually be a good thing. It was managing those intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
And they were, in my head, they were completely out of control. But yeah, I think yes, still now I'll have intrusive thoughts, but they're not dominating my life, and
Yeah.
I'm aware that it's normal and it's okay. And people that have had abs, according to the survey that he showed me, I'm very evidence based, so he showed me a lot of evidence. According to the survey that he showed me, people that have had no mental health issues report having intrusive thoughts and live alongside them quite happily. And that, yeah, that was important for me to hear, that I didn't have to get rid of them.
Yeah.
I just had to learn to live alongside them, to understand when it was time to pop the lid back on the box.
Yeah,
It sounds like a really great outcome, actually. And
it
that
does.
you had a great support around you, and other people who know you so well were able to pick up on it and come to
Yeah,
you and say, Justine, this is not okay. And then you had the support at home and at work to
yeah,
kind of go and explore that. I think things have shifted significantly, haven't they? And like you say, had it
yeah.
been earlier in your career, who knows what path that could have taken instead.
I think it would have been viewed very negatively. It'd be like,
Yeah,
here's the new girl. She can't cope with it. You've just got to get on with it. I
yeah,
think that was the attitude across the department was, well, if you can't stand the heat, get out the fire. Whereas now
yeah,
I think it's, yeah, we understand that this repeated exposure to horrific things is going to have an effect one way or another. It might not be in the way that you anticipate, but yeah, it was important that I was surrounded by people that could say, you're not you,
yeah.
and you need some help to find your way back to being you.
Fantastic. Now, I laughed when you said you cried at the dogs, not because I'm heartless or I find it funny,
Oh,
but because it's so common and something we hear often from CSIs. Like, I remember going to a scene where the dog had died, a woman had died, and the dog had died. And everybody was in shock. And when I got back to the office, everybody was just like, not the dog. So upset. And I'm like, what about the woman?
yeah, I
Everyone's like,
know.
not the dog. And it's quite common, I think, because we see this human interaction frequently. And also, you see what humans do to each other, you're exposed to it. You don't see it as often with animals.
Yeah,
And it just
No.
picks at a different emotional part of you, I think, doesn't it? But a lot of CSIs are the same. They don't cope as well with the animal stuff as they do the
yeah.
human stuff, which is bizarre. Probably
Well,
for some people listening, it's bizarre, but
yeah, and we all need to have a little word with ourselves. But yeah, it was a fire at a breeding kennels, and a heat lamp had set fire to some bedding, and a mom and puppies died.
Oh, that is
And
awful.
yeah, yeah, and it was, as you say, awful. But it did cause me to reflect a little bit and think, what's wrong with you? Why are you in tears about these dogs and not about the people?
Definitely
I think
nothing
it's
wrong
part.
with you. It's
No,
across the board.
it is, isn't it? I think it's the shock element because, like Ange says, we don't deal with it often, and you're not expecting it. Whereas you do gear yourself up, you know that you're dealing with death and
Mm,
humans. You kind of expect that. So I think it is partly the shock factor of it.
yeah, and I think everyone's got their Achilles heel. I think that was, like, again, something I was blessed with in my office, in my department, that we were very good at protecting each other. So if someone had just had a baby, you wouldn't expect them to go to a scene involving a baby.
Yeah.
We had a colleague who had a son, and a child of the same age with the same name was killed. And you think
Oh,
there's absolutely no way you would ever expect that colleague to
no.
attend that because it's too close to home. But we were always very good at working round who could deal with what at what time. And that changed when I had a baby. I didn't want to go to babies. When I had a toddler, I didn't want to go to toddlers. Now
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to go to teenagers. So it does change, but I think that's really important to have a team around you where you can say, I'm sorry, but this one's not for me.
yeah. I have to say we had that support, didn't we, when we were in?
We did, yeah. It's so important to have there, isn't it? Just an awareness of your colleagues and what might impact each other. And then, like you say, being confident enough to speak up and say that as well,
Yeah.
though.
something that I know you're heavily involved in, that I stepped away from, and it was probably around the time that I had my daughter, was DVI. That was a voluntary role in Lincolnshire. You don't have to be DVI trained, and it's very much been formalised in later years. But in my early career, that was something that I took part in the training and quite enjoyed, but realised as I got older, I wasn't sure that was a box I could put the lid back on, and I'd stepped away from DVI. And I think it is knowing those boundaries and knowing your limits and not feeling ashamed to say that's not for me anymore, and leaving it perhaps to the younger ones who perhaps feel the way I did when I was younger and felt more robust and that I could have dealt with it.
Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? Living consciously and knowing yourself, like you say, and knowing your own boundaries. And there are always younger ones coming through that are, like when we started, super keen and want to get into everything. And if there's a murder, like, I'm there. If there's a call out, happy for call out, I'll pick up the extra shifts. But I say that, but actually we were talking to one of our friends recently about it who's still in. She's like, some of them coming through now. I think there's one who she wants to stay a VCSI and never wants to see a body if she can help it.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such a big part of the job, and it's also a fascinating part of the job, and one that I was looking forward to getting involved in. So I guess I just don't get it from that point of view.
Me too, but certainly it depends what force you work for. Certainly in Lincolnshire, as a tier 1, we're such a small department that you would be expected to go to major crime, and that would involve bodies. You wouldn't go on your own, you would go with a tier 2 and a tier 3, but you wouldn't have that choice really. You'd be expected to be part of the team at major crime. That's something I say to the students that I teach. Don't go into a tier 1 job assuming that it will just be volume crime, especially in a small force. At the end of the day, you're part of a team, and yes, you'll work at someone else's direction, but you will be involved in scenes with bodies and post-mortem examinations.
Yeah.
You started as a VCSI, didn't you, Dean? You still tagged along on major crime where you could.
Yeah, well, because I knew that's what I wanted to do as well. And like you say, I found that fascinating. So if we didn't have anything on and something was going on, like, even if it was do you want to come along and see what's going on? I'd be like, yes, please.
Yeah, same.
Get me there.
Have you, in your time after 25 years, worked on any high profile cases?
Like I said, Lincolnshire try to keep things very quiet.
Under wraps.
Yeah. I think the highest profile case, just for me, is one that I wasn't that involved in, but it's the one that it remains unsolved. There's only been one unsolved murder in my career. So if I could draw attention to one, it would be that, even though I didn't have a huge amount of involvement in it. It was a gentleman called Alan Wood, and he was murdered in his home in Lound, which is a small village in Lincolnshire, and he had his hands bound. I'm not doing Lincolnshire any favours, am I? Here's me saying, oh, nothing else bad happened. He had his hands bound and was tortured, we think, for his PIN numbers for his cards. We think he was targeted because he drove a really nice car. He drove a Jaguar, lived in a nice house, but it was a rented accommodation. And actually, he worked in a supermarket and wasn't particularly wealthy, was just a really nice, very well-loved member of the community. And he was targeted and tied up and ultimately had his throat cut. And they seemingly tried to decapitate him post-mortem for whatever reason. But we have a full profile of the offender from the scene. We've put it into all sorts of databases across the world and never had a hit. And there's CCTV footage of the offender trying to get money out of his bank. So that would be one I would say, if you're interested in true crime, look up the Alan Wood murder in Lincolnshire. That was in 2009. Have a look at the CCTV. And obviously, if you have any information, then ring Lincolnshire Police. I was always hoping that one would be solved before I left CSI. So if anyone has any information, that would be great.
We might do a podcast on it now.
Yeah, that would be amazing if we could get something for that, wouldn't it? How
Yeah.
strange, though, as well, a full profile in CCTV and still unsolved.
Nothing.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable, isn't it? And
Yeah.
he was just one of those people that you just think, how did he become a victim of such a violent crime? There just doesn't appear to be anything. He didn't have any sort of risk factors. He wasn't living a high risk lifestyle. He worked in a supermarket. He rented a home. He would spend time in the village pub. He had a nice family, lots of friends. And then this absolutely horrific thing occurred, and we just can't seem to put a name to it.
I
That's
bet
an
it would be
interesting
nice to
one.
see, to see that solved in your time.
I'd
Yeah.
be very sad if it wasn't, because with all the genetic genealogy advancements and things, you think surely, we've got to get a break at some point. But what are we now? Coming up 20 years, not quite 17 years since the murder, and we're no further forward than we were then.
For having a full profile, it either suggests that it's somebody that's got a criminal background but never been caught,
Yeah.
or potentially somebody who's actually not got a criminal background, and for whatever reason this is just one-off freak
Yeah.
thing.
That would
Yeah,
seem
because
quite
like I
an
said,
extreme for a first something,
Well,
wouldn't
yeah.
it?
yeah,
Right.
we
It's
have checked. I say like I said, I didn't have a huge amount of involvement in this one. It's just sticks with me because it is the only unsolved one. But I know that they've looked worldwide at databases, because the thought was, is it someone that was only in the country for a short period
Yeah.
and didn't get caught for an offence while they were here, and they've then gone back to their own country or a different country. But yeah, as it stands at the minute, it remains unsolved.
Fascinating. I'm definitely going to take a
yes.
look at that one.
Yeah, we'll have a look. I'd not heard of that one, so we'll have a
And
look at
this
it.
this is the thing, you say high profile cases out of Lincolnshire, but have you heard of any? I think we don't tend to advertise what goes on in the county, even now, and certainly not back when I first started. Maybe more so now, you've got the internet and sort of news online, but we have had some really horrendous crimes committed, and yet people don't seem to hear about them.
Yeah, it's true. They say it pays to advertise, but I think Lincoln have probably got it the right way around.
Yeah, if they advertised that first few years, I don't think anyone would want to move there, would they?
Property
No,
market becomes
not
stagnant.
unless you want to be a CSI.
Yeah,
Yeah. Can you tell us, Justine, some things about what you enjoyed about the role of a CSI, and also then, on the other hand, what you didn't enjoy?
Something that I didn't think about that I ended up really enjoying, and I think is really important and you should think about, is whether you actually like interacting with members of the public, because
Yeah.
it's such a but it's a public facing role.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you are spending your days with members of the public, a lot of the time on the worst day of their lives, and that could be because they've had the car broken into, or their home broken into, or a relative's been injured in some way. But ultimately, you're spending time with strangers on a difficult day for them. So I think it's important to understand whether that's something that you want to do with your days. And for me, I really enjoyed it. I loved meeting people, and the fact that I wasn't sat at a desk all day and I didn't know what each day was going to hold. You'd go into work on a morning not knowing whether you were going to a theft from a vehicle or a double murder. And then that, as I got older, that became the thing that I disliked about the job. So I
Yeah.
didn't like the fact that I didn't know what I was going to be doing that day, and whether I was going to manage to get off on time and pick my daughter up from school, or whether I was going to be able to cook dinner that evening. I liked the excitement of it. And again, it makes you sound like a terrible person, because your excitement stems from tragedy happening to other people.
Yeah.
But I think if we're honest, that's why you go into the job in the first place. Like I said, you don't go into the job because you want to go to burglaries day in, day out. You go into the job because you want to be involved in interesting major crime. But again, having said that, in my later years, I'd be the CSI that had be quite happy covering the volume crime while everyone else ran out and did the major stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it changes across time based on your personal circumstances and your age and your energy levels. I don't have the energy to bounce out to major crime like I used to.
Yeah, it does change, doesn't it? Definitely.
It just becomes your life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you don't think about how ridiculous it is, really. What a ridiculous career. You don't think about it because it just is your career. Would I have wanted it any other way? Absolutely not. I have loved this job passionately. From being a sort of 14, 15-year-old reading true crime books to now. Would I want my daughter to do it? No, I wouldn't.
Oh, would you not? That's
No,
interesting.
absolutely
Why
not.
not?
I just want her to do something nice with her life. I guess
Something with a bit more
that
sunshine.
yeah, that protective side of me is like, you don't need to put yourself through this. Although I've loved it, I wouldn't want it for her. However, if one of my students said to me, the forensic students said to me, would you recommend being a CSI? I would say, yeah, absolutely. It's the best job in the world. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. Just not for my child. I want her to see nice things.
Probably is that protective part of you, isn't it? That part
Yeah.
of you that was seeing risk and danger after having a little one.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like you were saying, in terms of your enjoyment and stuff, like being on shift and that how that changes over time and the late shifts and staying out longer, especially when you have a youngster. I mean, I don't have one, but I'm just thinking of it from your perspective, that family time that you start to miss. And like you say, that you're not there always for the school run, or you're not always there for dinner, or Christmases, you miss out on special occasions quite often, don't you? So I could understand how that would start to change your enjoyment and your perspective as your life changed. And
yeah, I think it was strange because I met my daughter's dad. He was a police officer, and we met at a burglary.
oh, that's so romantic.
Well, so it got even more romantic when we were on a night out, and I happened to fall off a table, and he caught me.
Brilliant.
I maintained
Hang on, can we
that
just
he was
rewind to you were dancing on the table?
well, health and safety didn't exist back then. We're talking, early 2000s. So yeah, we met at a burglary and then got together after a night out when I was dancing on the table. We very rarely saw each other. We worked opposing shifts for years and years. And then he became self-employed and we saw even less of each other, which you would think, well, you're self-employed, but you realise you never stop working when you're self-employed.
Yeah.
He then joined the ambulance service and we were back to working shifts and juggling childcare. But actually, he then went into education with the ambulance service and started working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, pretty much. And I was still working shifts. And I'd always thought that working shifts was a problem and this was going to be the answer because he was going to be able to do more of the childcare and be available to pick her up from school and things. But what I actually found was that it really cut down on our time as a couple. So it was good for the child because she had a parent around, but actually those midweek days off that we'd always had together, where we could go for breakfast or to the cinema and just spend time as a couple, that sort of disappeared. So something I always thought was negative turned out to be quite a nice thing for us as a couple. Now I only work part-time as a CSI. Of course, it's flipped again because I work less shifts and less weekends and less evenings. So we do get more time together as a couple and more as a family.
So looking back, do you feel that the job's shaped you? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it shaped me in terribly positive ways, which saddens me, I guess, to think about, because I think, like I said, it did really affect the way I viewed the world. And I think it makes you quite a cynical person. I think you lose some of your empathy because you can't afford to be empathetic when you're seeing the types of scenes that you're seeing on a regular basis. I guess in a positive way, it makes you more resilient. You learn resilience, and maybe this is why I wouldn't want my daughter to do it. Maybe as I look back, I can see that it does have a negative impact in some ways. That doesn't detract from the enjoyment that I've taken from it. And like I said, I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't change it. But I think it probably affects you more in a negative way than it does in a positive way, unfortunately.
I think you're right. I think you do become much more cynical. And I think that your empathy is tested because you can't afford to be empathetic all the time. And if you let too much in, it's too overwhelming. So you kind of put up a barrier to it, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you know, it's interesting though. I don't know if I've ever seen those as negatives or as a way in which I've been shaped. But actually, as you were just saying it, then I thought, oh my God, yeah, that sounds like me. I know a couple of people have said to me over the years that I'm really cynical, and I think, am I? But they are. We're really cynical. Wait, so Dee and I, as you know, we've worked in disaster response, and we've been on a couple of deployments where people who've got to know us have like, you two are really cynical. Haven't they?
And you say, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
It's like,
But then quite often the thing that we've said has actually come true as well. It's like, well, there you go.
are we that cynical or just realistic?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's difficult, especially after 25 years. Who would I have been if I wasn't a CSI for 25
Yeah.
years? I don't know. So it's a really, really difficult question to answer.
Is there anything that you wish you'd known about the career before going into it?
I think I did quite a lot of research. Like I said, back then, times were different. So you could just ring up a police force and ask to go on attachment. You could just ask to go to a post-mortem and you would be allowed to do it. So I think I also wasn't influenced by TV programs. I think if you go into this job now because you've seen CSI Miami and you think it's going to be like that, then you're going to be in for a shock. Whereas I was quite prepared for what the job was going to be, and it was the way I expected. There were no big surprises, other than perhaps not considering how much of a public facing role it was. But fortunately, I do enjoy that kind of thing. But no, I would say more for people wanting to go into it these days, do your research, because what you see on the TV, on the dramatized versions of CSI, is wholly inaccurate. But also what you see on the true crime documentaries is a very concise version of what we do. As you will know, you spend 8-9 hours in a scene doing a tiny amount of work. In reality, that's compressed to 30 seconds in a documentary. So I think it comes as a bit of a shock that you can spend 4, 5, 6 days examining one room in a crime scene, depending on what's happened.
Yeah.
And I think that comes as a shock to people that have seen it on the TV and it's all instant gratification, and the job couldn't be further from that. Thanks to Mandy Johns and the attachments that I went out on and seeing the job from the inside at a very young age, that I did understand that there are very tedious elements to the job and boring days as well as the exciting days. Do your research. Don't assume it's going to be what you see on the TV, even on the documentary programs.
That's really good advice.
And it's not all that major crime, is it?
Well, it is in Lincolnshire.
I was going to say maybe in Yorkshire did, and it was actually.
No, it really isn't. We have seen, I don't know whether this is nationwide, but certainly in Lincolnshire, we have seen a change in crime types post-COVID. We do have a lot more major crime now post-COVID for whatever reason. Our attendance policies have also changed, so we don't go to a lot of the volume crime that we used to go to. But I think, bearing in mind the department is a similar size, we wouldn't have time to go to the volume crime. Is that because of the sheer amount of paperwork we need to complete now, or is that because there's a lot more major crime? I guess it's difficult to say, but it certainly feels like crime types have changed post-COVID.
What are you seeing more of?
Violent crime. So rather than just having a burglary, it'll be an aggravated burglary. There'll be underlying tensions there. So you'll have lots of tit for tat aggravated burglaries. We had one where someone had a leg cut off with a machete in an aggravated burglary. More violent crimes, more drug crimes. Now, like I said, whether that's that we do less jobs because of the sheer amount of paperwork, and therefore we only have time to go to major crime, and therefore it seems like there's more major crime than volume crime. I'm not sure.
From people that we've talked to, that does seem to be a nationwide thing as well.
Does it?
The volume crime is getting left by the wayside, which we don't really agree with, do we?
Not really. Like you say, though, it's a case of capacity to deal with
Yeah.
it, isn't it? But
I
it's
think I could get on board with it more if I knew that was because there was less volume
Yeah,
crime,
well, yeah,
as
definitely.
opposed to my suspicion that it's just we're spending a lot longer examining crime scenes, not in terms of evidence recovery, but in terms of the sheer amount of paperwork that you're obliged to complete. And
Yeah.
that's not a good use of CSI's time, in my opinion.
We agree wholeheartedly.
I think that people on the ground, or people like us that have been on the ground, that are seeing the changes and what these ISO standards and the accreditations doing in terms of the sheer amount of paperwork and the impact that it's having on CSIs and their ability to do the job. I think very, very few seem to agree. Of course, we agree that there should be standards and
Yes.
people should be checked, and you should be doing CPD, because people do become complacent in roles and sometimes maybe even a bit lazy if you've been doing it a long time.
Couldn't agree more. I think there's some very positive aspects to it, but trying to put lab constraints and lab conditions on a crime scene where you can't standardize anything because you're not in a lab, it then makes your life very difficult, and it takes away some of your ability, I think, to use your knowledge and your skills and your experience and make your own decisions on examining your crime scene. It's almost like you're beholden to sticking to a set of rules that really don't apply, but you spend time justifying why you haven't applied the rules, because if you don't, you're going to get pulled up for your paperwork. But I agree. Some of it, I think, is definitely a positive. I think we needed some standardization, but
I think that we could probably talk for hours on this. I think it'd be a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
It'd be a whole other really quite boring podcast. We can talk about something else.
Fascinating for us, like. So to round us up, you are now part-time, you've been part-time CSI and then also a lecturer at Lincoln University. So you've moved over part-time into academia. How are you finding that?
I absolutely love it. I genuinely, it fills me with joy because I am still so enthusiastic about the job. So to be able to stand there in front of 105 students who are as enthusiastic about CSI as I am, I think is an absolute gift. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah.
So I genuinely enjoy it. I love the interactions with the students and the ideas that they come up with, so that I genuinely learn from them and the ideas that they come up with, and then I can go back into the office and pretend the ideas are mine.
Brilliant.
Love that.
So it's a two-way street. I learn from them and hopefully they learn something from me. And I try to make it the course that I wanted to do in the late 90s that wasn't available because there wasn't a CSI course. So I try to give them what I think I would have wanted when I was their age, which is a very hands-on, practical based, relaxed, fun environment where we can learn. And let's be honest, it's a gift of a topic because it is interesting. So it's not a difficult topic to teach. And I could literally talk about CSI all day long, and therefore it just gives me a platform to do that. I really enjoy teaching the students and like I said, learning from them as well and bandying ideas about with them, and trying to think what their careers will look like and work out what CSI of the future will be and where their careers are going to take them. I think it's a really interesting time with genetic genealogy and all the mobile phone data that we can get now. I think it's going to look very different for CSIs in the future.
Yeah. Lucky, your students are very lucky to have you and have all of that practical skills and knowledge and all of that real world experience that you can share with them, but then they can draw down on. And I imagine you get a million questions a session, do you?
I do. I do. Like I said, it's very relaxed. The first thing I say to them in the first session I have with them is, I'm not a lecturer. I'm an operational CSI, and I approach my lectures as an operational CSI, and I do try and make them good fun and make sure that it's a conversation rather than me standing. Because the other thing with CSI is very often there aren't right and wrong answers.
Yeah.
It's not a subject where you say, well, this is the answer. Very often it is a conversation and we kind of get to the answer eventually. And I say to them, I can't teach you how to examine a crime scene, but I can teach you how to think like a CSI and use that knowledge in order to process the scene as appropriate. I hope to remain teaching them for a long time yet.
Brilliant. And teaching the next generation. What a better way, you've been there 25 years, to move on in your career, to take all that knowledge, experience, and then pass it on to the next generation. It must be really lovely.
They're very welcoming, because I do tend to get quite distracted and I go off on tangents and tell them stories and things, but they seem to quite like that. So
I bet they love it.
Yeah, I think the bringing the stories to it brings some of the realities in, doesn't it? So I bet you they absolutely love that bit of it.
I feel like that's what I was employed to do, was to give them a realistic idea of what being CSI is, and I don't sugarcoat it, and I am very honest about it, the good things and the bad things. But like I said, if they say to me, would you recommend a career as a CSI, I would say all day long, absolutely. But then at least hopefully they're going into it with a realistic understanding of what the job involves, rather than something they've seen on the TV.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Justine. Really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
It has.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on. It has been fascinating. I loved hearing your stories. And I'm sure our listeners are going to absolutely love that as well. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in for another episode. And we will be back in a fortnight's time, where we will take you back under the barrier tape.